The conference room fell silent as CEO Margaret Thornfield's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dr. Chen, your proprietary algorithms may have been valuable once, but let's be honest, you're easily replaceable. Any competent data scientist could reverse engineer your work within months. She leaned back in her leather chair, fingers steepled, watching my reaction with the cold satisfaction of someone who believed she held all the cards. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last 5 years building something far more complex than she could ever imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Chen, and I was the lead AI researcher at Quantum Dynamics, a cutting-edge tech company specializing in predictive market analysis. For 7 years, I had poured my soul into creating what I called the Phoenix algorithm, a machine learning system so sophisticated it could predict market fluctuations with 97% accuracy. The algorithm didn't just analyze data, it understood patterns that human minds couldn't even perceive, weaving together thousands of variables into predictions that had made quantum dynamics over $50 million in the past year alone. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Silicon Valley headquarters as I sat across from Margaret, her words still echoing in my mind. She had called this meeting under the pretense of discussing my upcoming promotion to Chief Technology Officer, a position I had been working toward for years. Instead, I found myself staring at a termination letter and a woman who clearly had no understanding of what she was about to lose. Margaret had joined Quantum Dynamics 6 months earlier as the new CEO, brought in by the board to modernize operations and increase profitability. She came from a traditional finance background, viewing technology as nothing more than expensive tools that could be easily swapped out when cheaper alternatives became available. From our first meeting, I could see she viewed me as an obstacle to her vision of a leaner, more cost-effective organization. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who was dismissing me had built her entire reputation on the profits generated by my algorithms. The Phoenix algorithm had revolutionized how Quantum Dynamics approached market prediction, turning us from a mid-tier consulting firm into an industry leader. Major investment banks were paying us millions for access to our insights, and venture capital firms were begging for partnerships. Yet here sat Margaret, convinced that my 7 years of research and development could be replicated by any fresh graduate with a computer science degree. I had seen this pattern before in the tech industry. New leadership comes in, sees high-paid specialists as unnecessary expenses, and believes that innovation can be commoditized and outsourced. What they never understand is that true breakthroughs don't come from following textbooks or copying existing solutions. They come from years of failed experiments, from understanding the subtle nuances that separate good algorithms from revolutionary ones, from the kind of deep expertise that can't be replicated by simply hiring more people. As Margaret continued her rehearsed speech about organizational restructuring and bringing in fresh perspectives, I found myself studying her face. There was a smugness there, a confidence born from ignorance rather than understanding. She truly believed that letting me go was a smart business decision, that she was eliminating an expensive resource that could be easily replaced. The termination package she offered was generous by most standards, 6 months of severance pay and full benefits, but it was nothing compared to the value I had created for the company. What Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand with her limited technical background, was that the Phoenix algorithm wasn't just code sitting on a server. It was an intricate ecosystem of interconnected systems, each one calibrated and refined through thousands of hours of testing and optimization. The algorithm had been trained on proprietary datasets that I had personally curated, using techniques that I had developed through years of trial and error. Most importantly, the core mathematical models that drove the system existed nowhere in the company's documentation. They lived entirely in my head. I had always been protective of my intellectual property, not out of paranoia, but out of professional caution. I had seen too many talented researchers have their life's work stolen or misappropriated by companies that viewed innovation as a commodity to be owned, rather than nurtured. So I had structured the Phoenix algorithm in layers, with the most critical components accessible only through my personal authentication protocols. To anyone else examining the code, it would appear to be a sophisticated but ultimately conventional machine learning system. The true genius lay hidden beneath the surface, protected by encryption and obfuscation that I had woven throughout the entire architecture. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Margaret outlining the transition plan and introducing me to Derek Williams, the young programmer she had hired to take over my responsibilities. Derek was talented, I could see that immediately, but he possessed the kind of academic knowledge that looked impressive on paper, while lacking the deep intuitive understanding that comes only from years of real-world application. He nodded eagerly, as Margaret explained how he would be, quote, streamlining and optimizing my algorithms, clearly excited about the opportunity to work with cutting-edge AI systems. I almost felt sorry for him. Derek had no idea what he was walking into, no understanding of the complexity that lay hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be well-documented code. Margaret had promised him that transitioning my work would be straightforward, that any competent programmer could understand and improve upon what I had built. It was the kind of overconfidence that would have been amusing if it weren't about to cost the company millions of dollars. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the meeting concluded, I gathered my few personal belongings from the conference room table: a coffee mug, a small succulent plant, and a notebook filled with observations and ideas that I had collected over the years. Margaret shook my hand with the professional courtesy of someone who believed she had just solved a major business problem, while Derek looked on with the eager anticipation of someone about to inherit a technological treasure trove. Walking through the office for what I assumed would be the last time, I was struck by how normal everything appeared. My colleagues were hunched over their computers, working on projects that I had initiated or supervised, completely unaware that the foundation of their work was about to crumble. The servers humming quietly in the corner were running algorithms that I had designed, processing data through models that existed nowhere except in my protected files and my memory. I made my way to my office, a corner space overlooking the San Francisco Bay that I had called home for 7 years. The walls were covered with whiteboards filled with equations and diagrams that traced the evolution of the Phoenix algorithm from its earliest iterations to its current sophisticated form. As I packed my personal items, I found myself looking at these mathematical expressions with a mixture of pride and sadness. They represented thousands of hours of work, countless failed experiments, and the gradual accumulation of insights that had ultimately led to breakthrough innovations. The most important items in my office weren't the computer equipment or the technical books. They were the handwritten notebooks that contained my research observations, failed experiment results, and the kind of intuitive insights that can't be captured in formal documentation. These notebooks represented the real intellectual property of my work, the deep understanding that separated my algorithms from the countless other machine learning systems that cluttered the tech landscape. I spent the afternoon transferring my personal files to encrypted external drives, being careful to avoid any data that technically belonged to quantum dynamics. What I was taking was my own research, my own insights, and my own understanding of mathematical principles that no company could claim to own. The actual implementation of the Phoenix algorithm would remain on quantum servers, but the knowledge of how it truly worked, why it worked, and how to maintain its exceptional performance would walk out the door with me. As evening approached, I found myself standing in the parking garage, looking back at the building that had been my professional home for so many years. The lights in the windows created a warm glow against the darkening sky, and I could see my former colleagues still working at their desks, probably discussing how they would handle the transition of my responsibilities. None of them understood that they weren't just losing an employee, they were losing the institutional knowledge that made their most valuable technology possible. The drive home through Silicon Valley traffic gave me time to process what had just happened, and to begin thinking about what came next. Margaret's words kept echoing in my mind. "Easily replaceable," she had said. It was the kind of statement that revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how innovation actually works, how breakthrough technologies are created and maintained. She saw only the surface, code running on servers, generating reports and predictions, without understanding the years of accumulated expertise that made those predictions possible. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the boxes of notebooks and personal items I had brought from quantum dynamics, and began to plan my next move. I wasn't angry, at least not in the conventional sense. What I felt was something closer to anticipation, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing something that others don't. Margaret believed she had eliminated an expensive problem, but what she had actually done was set in motion a series of events that would cost her company far more than my salary ever had. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the market analysis reports that Quantum Dynamics had published over the past year, each one based on insights generated by the Phoenix algorithm. The predictions had been remarkably accurate, helping major investment firms avoid losses during market downturns and identify profitable opportunities that their own analysts had missed. This accuracy hadn't happened by accident. It was the result of years of refinement, calibration, and the kind of deep mathematical understanding that couldn't be easily replicated. Over the next several days, I watched from a distance as Derek began his attempt to understand and maintain my algorithms. Through professional networks and industry contacts, I heard whispers of confusion and frustration as the new team tried to modify systems they didn't truly understand. The Phoenix algorithm continued to function, but its predictions began to show subtle signs of drift, small inaccuracies that would gradually compound into larger problems. Margaret had made the classic mistake of assuming that complex technology could be treated like simple machinery, that you could replace the engineer and expect the same performance. What she didn't understand was that the Phoenix algorithm wasn't just software. It was the embodiment of years of research, intuition, and expertise that had been carefully woven into every component of the system. Without that guiding knowledge, the algorithm would slowly degrade, like a finely tuned instrument falling out of calibration. The first signs of trouble appeared within 2 weeks of my departure. The algorithm's predictions began showing increased variance, and several of Quantum's major clients started asking questions about the accuracy of their reports. Derek and his team worked frantically to identify the source of the problem, but they were looking at symptoms rather than causes, trying to fix a system they didn't truly understand. I learned about these developments through industry contacts and former colleagues who reached out privately to ask if I knew what was happening at Quantum Dynamics. Word travels quickly in the tight-knit world of Silicon Valley tech, and it was becoming apparent that something was seriously wrong with the company's flagship technology. The irony was palpable. In trying to save money by eliminating me, Margaret had created a crisis that would ultimately cost far more than my salary ever had. As I prepared to launch my own consulting firm, I reflected on the lesson that Margaret was about to learn the hard way. True expertise can't be easily replaced or reverse-engineered, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. The Phoenix algorithm represented 7 years of accumulated knowledge, failed experiments, and gradual insights that had been refined into something extraordinary. That kind of expertise doesn't come from hiring more programmers or offering bigger budgets. It comes from time, dedication, and the kind of deep understanding that can't be bought or stolen. The best part wasn't that I was about to prove Margaret wrong. It was that I was about to build something even better, something that would make the Phoenix algorithm look like a rough draft. And this time, I would make sure that the people who valued my work would pay what it was truly worth. The first month after my departure from Quantum Dynamics felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck from a safe distance. I had established my home office in a converted garage, surrounded by whiteboards covered in new mathematical formulas and algorithmic concepts that would soon become the foundation of something far more powerful than the Phoenix algorithm. While Derek and his team struggled to maintain what I had built, I was already 3 steps ahead, developing technologies that would revolutionize the entire industry. My mornings began with coffee and meditation, a ritual that helped me process the creative insights that came during sleep. The freedom from corporate meetings and bureaucratic constraints had unleashed a level of innovation I hadn't experienced in years. Without the pressure to maintain existing systems, I could explore radical new approaches to market prediction that I had only dreamed about while working under Quantum's limitations. The ideas flowed like water breaking through a dam, each concept building upon the last in ways that would have been impossible within the rigid structure of my former employer. Word of Quantum Dynamics. Declining performance had begun spreading through Silicon Valley's investment community like wildfire. The Phoenix algorithm's accuracy had dropped from 97% to barely 85%, and several major clients had already begun questioning the reliability of their market predictions. Margaret's cost-cutting measure was turning into a public relations nightmare, as industry publications started reporting on the company's mysterious technical difficulties. I received my first consulting inquiry from Harrison Mills, a venture capital partner who had been one of Quantum's most profitable clients. Harrison was known for his sharp business instincts and his ability to spot emerging trends before they became mainstream. His call came on a Tuesday morning while I was working on breakthrough equations that would later become the core of my new Prometheus system. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying the urgency of someone watching money slip away. "I don't know what's happening over at Quantum, but their predictions have been off by margins that are costing my firm millions. Word on the street is that you were the real genius behind their technology. I need to know if you're available for independent consultation." This was the moment I had been preparing for, the validation that my expertise had value far beyond what any corporate salary could represent. Harrison wasn't just offering me a consulting contract. He was offering me the opportunity to prove that innovation and expertise couldn't be commoditized or replaced by cheaper alternatives. I quoted him a rate that was 3 times what Quantum had been charging for similar services, explaining that he would be getting access to cutting-edge technology that surpassed anything currently available in the market. Within a week, I had signed contracts with 3 major investment firms, each paying premium rates for access to my developing Prometheus system. Unlike the Phoenix algorithm, which had been constrained by corporate policies and existing infrastructure, Prometheus was being built from the ground up with revolutionary approaches that I had only theorized about during my time at Quantum. The system incorporated advanced neural networks, quantum computing principles, and mathematical models that existed nowhere else in the industry. The irony of the situation was becoming increasingly apparent as each day passed. Margaret had fired me to save approximately $200,000 per year in salary and benefits, but her decision was now costing Quantum Dynamics millions in lost revenue and reputation damage. Derek and his expanded team of programmers were working around the clock trying to reverse engineer systems they couldn't fully comprehend, while I was building something entirely new that would make their efforts obsolete. 3 months after leaving Quantum, I received an unexpected call from Dr. James Wright, the company's former chief technology officer who had been forced into early retirement as part of Margaret's restructuring efforts. James had been a mentor during my early years at the company, and his departure had been another red flag that Margaret didn't understand the value of institutional knowledge and expertise. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern, "I've been hearing remarkable things about your new consulting work. But I also need to warn you about what's happening at Quantum. Margaret has authorized a team of reverse engineering specialists to analyze the Phoenix algorithm. They're spending enormous amounts of money trying to understand how your system works, and frankly, they're failing spectacularly." This revelation was both fascinating and troubling. The idea that Quantum Dynamics was spending significant resources trying to reverse engineer technology that I had created demonstrated just how valuable my expertise had been, but it also revealed the desperation that was driving Margaret's decision-making. Rather than admitting her mistake and attempting to rehire me, she was doubling down on her belief that technical innovation could be conquered through brute force and unlimited budgets. James explained that Margaret had hired a team of specialists from a prominent consulting firm, paying them over $50,000 per week to analyze my algorithms and documentation. These experts were some of the most expensive technical consultants in Silicon Valley, yet they were making no meaningful progress in understanding the deeper principles that made the Phoenix algorithm work. They could see what the system did, but they couldn't understand why it worked or how to improve upon its performance. The consulting team's reports, which James had seen through mutual connections, painted a picture of increasing frustration and bewilderment. They described the Phoenix algorithm as brilliantly complex and, quote, "unlike anything in current literature," but they couldn't identify the mathematical foundations that made its predictions so accurate. The deeper they dug into my code, the more they realized that they were looking at the surface layer of something far more sophisticated than they had initially understood. Meanwhile, my Prometheus system was beginning to generate results that exceeded even my own expectations. The new mathematical models I had developed were producing market predictions, with accuracy rates approaching 99%, a level of precision that was previously thought to be impossible. My clients were seeing returns on their investments that far exceeded what they had experienced with Quantum's services, and word was beginning to spread through the investment community about the mysterious new consulting firm that was outperforming all existing market analysis tools. The breakthrough moment came when I received a call from Margaret herself, exactly 4 months after she had terminated my employment. Her voice carried none of the confident arrogance that had characterized our final meeting. Instead, she sounded like someone who was drowning and desperately grasping for a lifeline. "Elena?" she began, clearly struggling with the words. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your departure from Quantum. We've been experiencing some technical challenges, and the board is asking difficult questions about our flagship technology. I was wondering if you might be interested in returning as a consultant to help us optimize our systems." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in negotiation and the power dynamics of true expertise. Margaret explained that Quantum had already spent over $800,000 on reverse engineering consultants, with nothing to show for their investment except reports confirming that my algorithms were far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. The company's stock price had dropped by 30% as major clients moved their business to competitors, and the board was beginning to question Margaret's leadership decisions. I listened patiently as she outlined various scenarios for my return, each one revealing just how desperate the situation had become. She offered to reinstate me at my previous position with a significant salary increase, then suggested a consulting arrangement that would give me access to Quantum's resources while allowing me to maintain my independence. When I remained non-committal, she finally revealed the true scope of the crisis. "The board has authorized me to spend up to $2 million to resolve our technical issues," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need the Phoenix algorithm running at its previous performance levels, and our internal team believes that's impossible without your direct involvement." This was the moment I had been waiting for, the complete validation of everything I had always known about the irreplaceable nature of true expertise. Margaret had gone from claiming that any developer could replace me to authorizing a budget that was 10 times my annual salary, just to try to understand what I had created. The $2 million figure wasn't just about fixing immediate problems. It represented the cost of Margaret's fundamental misunderstanding of how innovation works and the value of accumulated expertise. I declined her offer politely but firmly, explaining that my consulting practice was fully booked with clients who appreciated the value of cutting-edge technology. What I didn't tell her was that my new Prometheus system was already generating more revenue in monthly consulting fees than my entire previous annual salary at Quantum. The clients who valued innovation were willing to pay premium rates for access to technology that delivered exceptional results. The final chapter of this story unfolded over the following months as Quantum Dynamics' struggles became public knowledge throughout Silicon Valley. Industry publications began reporting on the company's technical difficulties and the massive resources being devoted to reverse engineering efforts that were producing no meaningful results. Margaret's reputation as a leader who could modernize operations was replaced by whispers about the executive who had fired the company's most valuable asset and then spent millions trying to recreate her expertise. The reverse engineering team's final report, which eventually leaked through industry contacts, was a devastating admission of failure. After spending over $2 million and 18 months of intensive analysis, they concluded that the Phoenix algorithm represented a unique synthesis of advanced mathematical principles and proprietary techniques that cannot be replicated without access to the original creator's methodology and insights. In simpler terms, they admitted that Margaret had been wrong about the replaceability of my expertise. By the end of my first year as an independent consultant, I had built a client base that generated more revenue than Quantum Dynamics' entire AI division. The Prometheus system had become the gold standard for market prediction technology, with waiting lists of investment firms eager to pay premium rates for access to its insights. I had proven that true innovation couldn't be commoditized, reverse engineered, or replaced by simply hiring more people and throwing money at problems. The most satisfying aspect of this journey wasn't the financial success or the professional recognition, though both were deeply gratifying. It was the validation of a fundamental principle that too many executives like Margaret fail to understand. Genuine expertise is built through years of accumulated knowledge, failed experiments, and gradual insights that can't be captured in documentation or replicated through reverse engineering efforts. Margaret's attempt to replace me with cheaper alternatives had backfired spectacularly, costing her company far more than my salary ever would have. But more importantly, her actions had freed me to build something far more valuable than anything I could have created within the constraints of corporate employment. The Prometheus system represented not just technological advancement, but the power of true expertise to create value that extends far beyond traditional employment relationships. Looking back on this experience from my current position as the founder of a successful consulting firm, I realize that Margaret's dismissive words about my replaceability had actually been a gift. They had forced me to prove my worth in the marketplace, to build something entirely new, and to demonstrate that innovation comes from expertise, not from budgets or teams of contractors trying to reverse engineer someone else's brilliance. The lesson for anyone facing similar situations is clear. True expertise has value that goes far beyond what any single employer might recognize. When someone tells you that you're easily replaceable, they're revealing their own limitations rather than yours. The key is to have the confidence to prove them wrong, not through arguments or confrontation, but through results that speak for themselves. Today, I wake up each morning excited about the challenges and opportunities ahead. Working with clients who value innovation and understand that breakthrough technology comes from expertise, not from cutting costs or replacing experienced professionals with cheaper alternatives. Margaret taught me that the best response to being undervalued isn't anger or resentment, but the quiet confidence that comes from building something so exceptional that it proves your worth beyond any doubt. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.